the richest heir group that quietly owns the city of Dallas. That's exactly what I'm about to lay out for you right now. All right, next time you see a picture of the Dallas skyline, the one, that big glowing ball on a stick lit up against the Texas sky, I want you to understand something. You're not looking at a city, you're looking at a family's handiwork. Because a huge chunk of what made modern Dallas was built, financed, and is still controlled by the heirs of one man. And most folks driving past it every single day have no idea. We're talking about the Hunt family, the children and grandchildren of a Texas oil man named H.L. Hunt, a guy who, at one point, was reputed to be the single richest man in all of America. He struck a fortune so enormous out of the Texas dirt that when he died, he didn't leave behind one heir. He left behind a whole group of them. And those heirs didn't just sit on the money and waste it, like nearly every rich kid in history does. They took it, split off in different directions, and built so much that today, the Hunt name is stamped all over Dallas, the real estate, the energy business, even the sports teams, without ever needing to brag about a dime of it. And here's what makes them so fascinating. These are people who could buy half the city outright, and yet they operate in near total silence. No reality shows, no loudmouth feuds played out on the news. Just quiet, generational, old Texas money that prefers to let the buildings do the talking. This is not a story about one lucky oil strike. This is a story about a group of heirs who took a dead man's fortune and turned it into a grip on an entire city, and then made sure the whole thing stayed locked in the family where nobody could touch it. Let's get into it. Quick rewind, because you can't understand the heirs without understanding the wild man who started it all. H.L. Hunt was not born rich, not even close. He was a gambler, a real one, a card shark who reportedly won early stakes at the poker table, and he took that gambler's nerve and pointed it straight at the oil business back when wildcatting was the riskiest game in America. You either hit nothing and went broke, or you hit a gusher and changed your family's name forever. And H.L. Hunt hit one of the biggest gushers anybody ever hit. He got his hands on a piece of the legendary East Texas oil field, one of the largest oil discoveries in American history, and that single play turned him into one of the wealthiest human beings on the planet. He moved his operation to Dallas, built himself a giant white mansion modeled after Mount Vernon, overlooking a lake, and ran his businesses like a secretive one-man kingdom. He was eccentric, stubborn, and absolutely loaded. But here's the thing that decides the fate of every great fortune. The man who builds it eventually dies. And H.L. Hunt had a sprawling family, a whole crowd of children, which usually means one thing. The money gets split, the heirs fight, and within a generation, it all evaporates in lawsuits and bad spending. That's the normal ending for a fortune this size. The Hunt heirs were supposed to be a cautionary tale. Instead, several of them turned out to be every bit as driven as the old man, and they took their slices of the inheritance and went and built whole new dynasties of their own. Let's talk about the money, because people hear Texas oil family and just picture a guy in a big hat. So let me make the real scale land. The heirs didn't inherit millions. They inherited the kind of money that builds skylines. And the most important branch of them poured it into a privately held operation that runs oil and gas, real estate, and investments, a business that does billions upon billions in value, almost entirely owned by the family. No public shareholders, no stock ticker, just the Hunts. That alone makes them some of the wealthiest people in the entire country, with individual family members sitting on fortunes deep into the billions. And here's the part that gets me. You would never know it to look at how they carry themselves. These aren't people chasing magazine covers or screaming for attention. The most powerful of the heirs is famously so private that the average American, even the average Texan, couldn't pick him out of a lineup, despite the fact that he's quietly one of the most influential people in the entire state, advised presidents, sat on the boards that shaped the country, and done almost all of it without a flicker of the spotlight. Most people, the second they get real money, they get loud. They want statues and headlines. The Hunt heirs went the other way. They figured out that real power in Texas doesn't shout. It owns the building you're standing in and never says a word about it. Staying quiet wasn't shyness, it was strategy. Here's the first weapon, and it's the one everything else is built on. The main hunt operation is private. Fiercely, deliberately private. Family owned, family controlled, with no outside shareholders to answer to, and no stock market breathing down its neck. And in a world obsessed with going public and cashing out, that choice is the whole secret. Think about what staying private actually buys you. When you don't have shareholders, nobody can force you to sell. Nobody can vote you out. Nobody is screaming at you every 90 days to hit some short-term number or watch your stock get hammered. You answer to your own family and absolutely nobody else. You get to make a decision today that won't pay off for 30 years, and there's not a soul on earth who can stop you. That's exactly how the Hunt heirs have played it. They kept the whole operation locked inside the family, made their big moves with their own money, and never handed an outsider the leverage to pry it open. When the oil business got brutal, and oh, it got brutal, we'll get to that, they didn't have a panicked board forcing them to fire sale everything at the bottom. They could ride it out. They could be patient. A public company is a glass house anybody can throw a rock through. The Hunts built a fortress with the family holding every single key, and that decision is why they're still standing when so many louder Texas fortunes turn to dust. Because every story like this has an enemy, and for an oil family, the enemy is the most ruthless force there is, the boom and bust cycle. The savage, stomach-churning roller coaster of energy prices that has made and destroyed more Texas fortunes than anything else in history. One year you're a king because oil is sky high. The next year the price collapses, the banks come calling, and the same men who are buying jets are filing for bankruptcy. That cycle is the beast every oil family has to survive. And the Hunts didn't just survive it, they got a near-fatal taste of just how cruel it can be. Because some of the heirs, the famous Hunt brothers, made one of the most legendary, high-stakes gambles in financial history. In the late 1970s, they tried to do something almost nobody had ever dared. They went to corner the silver market. They bought up a staggering amount of the world's silver, drove the price to the moon, and for a brief, dizzying moment, it looked like they'd pull off the trade of the century. Then, the powers that be changed the rules on them. The exchanges and regulators stepped in, the silver price came crashing back down to earth, and what's remembered as Silver Thursday wiped out an absolute mountain of the family's money practically overnight. It was one of the most spectacular financial collapses anybody had ever seen. The market and the people who run it reached out and broke one of the boldest bets in American history. That is the enemy in its purest form, the brutal reminder that no matter how rich you are, the market can humble you in a single afternoon. And it's exactly why the smartest heirs swore off the casino, went private, and built something the boom and bust could never knock down. Here's the weapon you can literally walk through, because the smartest of the heirs understood something deep in their bones. Oil money is fickle, but land is forever. So they took the family fortune and poured an enormous amount of it into the one thing they could actually hold on to: downtown Dallas itself. This is the family behind a massive chunk of the modern Dallas skyline. The heirs developed the district that gave the city its most iconic landmark, that glowing observation tower. You picture the second somebody says, Dallas. They built the towers, the hotels, the headquarters, the whole reborn stretch of downtown that turned Dallas from just another sprawling Texas town into a real skyline city. When you look at postcards of Dallas, you are very often looking at real estate this family conceived, financed, and still controls. And think about why that's so much smarter than just chasing the next oil well. An oil field eventually runs dry. A skyline doesn't. By taking the volatile, here today, gone tomorrow oil money and converting it into the literal ground the city is built on, the heirs turned a fortune that could have vanished in a bust into something permanent. Buildings that collect rent decade after decade, land that only gets more valuable as the city grows around it. They didn't just make money in Dallas. They became Dallas, the bedrock under it, the steel above it, the landlord nobody thinks about while they ride the elevator up. Now, here's a weapon that takes a special kind of nerve, and it's pure H.L. Hunt bloodline. The family's oil operation made its name doing something the enormous, cautious oil giants were too nervous to do, going into the wildest, riskiest corners of the world and drilling where nobody else would. While the big super majors sat in their boardrooms running endless risk assessments, the Hunt operation went into difficult, far-flung places on the other side of the planet and found massive amounts of oil that everyone else had passed on. They turned remote, overlooked, politically complicated ground into gushers. That's the gambler's instinct. Again, the same nerve the old man had at the poker table, just played out on a global scale with hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. And here's why that's such a powerful edge. When you're willing to go where the giants are too frightened to step, you get first crack at the prizes nobody else is fighting over. Less competition, bigger rewards. The super majors play it safe and split the obvious fields 100 ways. The Hunts went out to the edges of the map, took the bet others wouldn't, and brought home the kind of discoveries that keep a private family fortune growing for generations. They didn't follow the crowd into the safe oil. They went hunting where the crowd was too scared to look. Here's the weapon that proves this isn't just an oil story. It's a story about heirs who each went and conquered something completely different. Because while one branch was building skylines and drilling the world, another heir took the family money in a direction nobody saw coming and ended up shaping the way every single American spends their weekends. One of the sons became one of the most important figures in the history of American sports, full stop. He launched a brand new football league when the establishment laughed at him, owned a championship football team, and this is the wild part, he's the person who actually came up with the name, the Super Bowl. That phrase, the biggest single event on the American calendar, the thing 2/3 of the country gathers around every February, that came out of a Hunt heir's head. And the sports building didn't stop at football. Money and belief went into professional soccer in America back when everybody said it would never work, helping plant the seeds of a sport that's now exploding all over the country. Think about what that tells you about this family. It wasn't one lucky person. It was a whole group of heirs, each one carrying that same restless, build something drive, scattering out into oil, real estate, finance, and sports, dominating in every direction they pointed. Most families would kill to produce one titan. The Hunts produced a whole roster off the same bloodline. That's not luck. That's something the old man baked into them, the refusal to ever just sit still and be comfortable with inherited money. So how does one family hold on to this much across this many people for this long without it all blowing apart? Here's the mechanism, and it comes down to discipline. They kept the core operation private, kept control inside the bloodline, and passed it down to heirs who actually knew how to run the thing instead of just spend from it. Most rich families lose everything the same predictable way. The founder dies, the heirs splinter into warring camps. Somebody insists on selling, somebody sues, the outsiders smell blood and move in, and within a generation or two, the family that built it all is reduced to a famous last name and a stack of old photos. The Hunts had every ingredient for that disaster: a huge family, a giant fortune, and plenty of drama along the way. And yet the central engine kept running, kept private, kept in Hunt hands. And here's why that matters to you, the regular person watching this. When a business is held by a family that thinks in generations instead of quarters, it gets to do things no public company ever could. It can weather a catastrophic year without panicking. It can hold a piece of land for 50 years until it's worth 100 times what they paid. It can take a wild swing on a faraway oil field or a brand new sports league because there's no nervous board to stop it. The family lock on the door wasn't just about keeping strangers out. It was about keeping the freedom to play a game measured in decades while everybody else is sweating the next 3 months. Let me be straight with you, because this is the part worth sitting with. We're living in a time where it feels like every great American fortune eventually gets stripped for parts. The founder builds something real, and a generation later, the heirs sell it to a bank, or some Wall Street firm chops it up, or the whole thing gets shipped off to the highest foreign bidder, and the city that depended on it gets left holding the bag. We've all watched it happen to places we love. And then there's this group of heirs in Dallas, people who inherited a giant fortune and could have done the lazy, greedy thing every single day, cash it all out, sell off the buildings, liquidate the oil business, and coast through life on a beach somewhere, while the family name slowly faded. Plenty of rich kids have done exactly that. Nobody would have been shocked. They didn't. They took the old man's money and they kept building a skyline, an energy business that spans the globe, a sports legacy the whole country enjoys without even knowing where it came from. They kept it private so it couldn't be raided. They kept it in Dallas so the city they came from got stronger, not gutted. They turned fragile oil money into permanent things. Land, buildings, institutions that will still be standing long after all of them are gone. Are they perfect? No. This family has had its feuds, its scandals, its spectacular public stumbles. That silver disaster alone could fill a whole separate video. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend everyone with this kind of money is a saint, but in a country where it feels like everything valuable eventually gets sold off and hollowed out, here's a group of heirs who took what they were handed and made it bigger, kept it home, and built things that actually last. That's a whole lot rarer than the billions. Here's the last piece, and it's the proof they pulled it off. The old man has been gone for decades. Some of the most famous heirs have passed on too. And yet, the thing they built is still standing. The towers still light up the Dallas night. The energy business still hunts for oil across the world. The sports teams still take the field. And the next generation of the family has already stepped in to keep all of it pointed in the same direction. Most fortunes are a bonfire, bright and loud, while the person who lit it is alive, and cold ash the moment they're gone. The Hunt heirs didn't build a bonfire. They built foundations, the literal kind, under the buildings that hold up a city skyline, the sort of thing that stands long after the people who poured it have left the room. A group of heirs out of Dallas, who never needed the spotlight, who survived the day the market tried to break them, and who took one gambler's oil fortune and refused to let it die with him. They didn't just inherit the old man's money. They inherited his nerve, and they used it to make sure the family's grip on that city would outlast every single one of them.